2 years ago, the Federal Maritime Commission chairman Dan Maffei sat in front of the Lloyds List microphone and bluntly told the container carriers to buck up their Public Relations Act. They needed to do a better job of explaining the economics of container shipping and the industry's essential role in supporting commerce. That was his basic beef. Well, a lot has happened since then, so when Dan was in town recently, we couldn't pass up the opportunity to drag him once again into a small room and insist that he answer another stream of questions from our team. A short disclaimer here. I'm afraid this one was recorded at the end of London International Shipping Week, so it's a few weeks old, but the conversation was too good not to let you have a listen. You can hear the combined forces of our containers editor, James Baker, our US correspondent, Raanan, and Janet Porter, the chair of the Lloyds List editorial board, all throwing questions his way. And we start with Janet.
Well, perhaps, Dan, could you just sum up to begin with the relationship now between the Commission and shipping lines? It's been a bit fraught over the past few years. How would you summarise it now?
I think it's pretty good. I mean, as you know, the world of ocean shipping is very interesting and almost a paradox because it is a global industry with multi-billion-dollar companies and many different kinds of stakeholders, and yet it's a small world. Everybody sort of knows each other. There's only 9 major carriers in the world, and we try to be, to a certain extent, a collaborative regulator in that we don't play a game of gotcha. We try to make it as clear as possible, including dialogues with individual lines that we do through our VOCC, or Vessel Operating Common Carrier Audit Program. That what we expect and what will make sure that they kind of stay out of trouble with us. One of the things I did over here before I came up to London Shipping Week is I was down in Marseille visiting with CMA CGM's executives. I have done that with other lines as well, and certainly all of them, they're U.S. executives, and many of them they're home base executives. So we try to have that line of communication open. Now, are they upset about certain regulations? They may be, but the question is, are they upset with us, or are they really upset with Congress and the President, who passed the Ocean Shipping Reform Act that mandated that we do these things? So I think that provided we write the regulations in such a way that there aren't unintended consequences, I think that they will look at it and go, well, this is a pain, but it doesn't hurt our business or really affect our overall strategy.
There has been a sense that OSRA says one thing, or up to a point, and that FMC has taken that and maybe inched a little bit further. In some circles, there's this comment anyway that perhaps...
Yeah. Whether we're talking about the so-called refusal to deal rule, which sort of in effect involves exports, or the detention and demurrage billing rule, the comments clearly, roughly half, maybe a little less than half the comments say what you're saying. The other little less than half say that we're not going far enough, and that don't we? And by the way, including letters from the members of Congress and the senators that you're being too timid, you're being too this is we wanted you to do this. So usually if half is telling you you're wrong in one direction, half in the other, you're probably getting something right. I think there was one comment that said you guys are doing great, thank you. But
you have you said the senators, that maybe the representative, they're saying you're too timid. How do you balance that? Because liners might be they're the big businesses, and they're sitting on billions of dollars of profits from the pandemic, but they don't have a constituency in the U.S., so they don't have any they don't have representatives putting pressure on you or trying to pass laws supporting them. So how do you balance all of these interests?
Yeah, I mean, that's true, and certainly part of the politics that passed the Ocean Shipping Reform Act. And to be fair, it's I'm not I was an advocate of the Ocean Shipping Reform Act myself. I'm independent and can take that kind of position. But at the end of the day, we want a smooth supply chain, and the challenge is if we come down too hard on the carriers in a way that doesn't make sense and sets the wrong incentives. One, they could bring less service to the U.S. or not as good service, or worse, if a line goes out of business or feels it's forced to merge with someone, you could end up with less competition in the end, and that would hurt American customers. So there are certainly reasons to be balanced. We are, as you remember, a bipartisan commission, and we try to do things by consensus, partially so that if there are changes in government, that there's not any major changes in ocean shipping policy, and so we try to get to that stage, and so that's one of the reasons. But also the law itself was, we get both this. The Ocean Shipping Reform Act doesn't do anything idea, and we also get it's re-regulating, et cetera. And of course, it's neither one of those. It enhances our. I think probably there's a couple of additional small authorities, but essentially enhances the authority we already have, or reinforces some of the interpretations we had. For instance, the incentive principle on detention to merge. And it gives us the resources really to be more of a referee on the field instead of just at the end of the day, taking complaints from either team about the game. But it does not get us involved in the game, and so if we're trying to follow the law itself, I think the law itself had a fairly balanced approach, right? And so as long as we don't go too far, in that interpretation. I think it'll be a fairly balanced measure. The law did not deal with things like competition policy and stuff. There were proposals, but they were not included in that particular law. So a lot of the most controversial stuff, or the places where the carriers would have the most concern, weren't in there.
There still seems to be this sense in Washington that foreign carriers mean bad. Are you able to persuade them that the foreign carriers are still just as competitive and provide the sort of service that the US needs? Because you see this all the time. Foreign is, in quotes, is not a good thing.
Yeah, I think the challenge is that it's not my job to persuade them. I certainly am willing to give candid advice to the carriers, and frankly, I think some of them have made strides. A couple of them have hired U.S. Government relations people that have extraordinarily good reputations and have done a good job. But they still are a minority of them, and trying to explain the industry to folks. Look, there are substantial offices in the United States. Hapag-Lloyd just moved 700 employees into Atlanta, Georgia in the last couple of years. So, one of the things that I've advised them to do, and they've, I think, now done, is gone and visited the Georgia senators and sort of said, look, the overall company might be in another country, but, Toyota is in Japan, and yet Toyota has huge facilities in the U.S. So there is that balance. But I think that it's just not my job, though, to defend the industry. It is my job to sort of educate about the industry and things like, if we were to completely get rid of the antitrust exemption, for instance, it would hurt medium and small ports in the United States because there would simply be less service. And if you don't believe there'd be less service and there would be just as much service, then there would be a lot more ships, and that means a lot more pollution. So either way you slice it, it would be a loss. And as long as we continue to monitor these alliances as closely as we do, it's more, frankly, pro-competitive to have them than anti-competitive. In fact, my bigger fear is with the M2 breaking up that you'll see a whole new set of constellations, potentially a wave of mergers and acquisitions because of the alliance structure being threatened from the private side.
I'd like to ask you more about that, but when we saw you 2 years ago, you mentioned about lines needed to be better at PR, which it sounds like what you're saying they are a little bit, but still a long way to go.
Yeah, and I'm even just talking about government relations. It's interesting because when you go to a local office, say Costco, which of course is the Chinese-owned carrier. I've been to their office I think it's in Secaucus, New Jersey, I mean, they do an amazing stuff in their local community. They sponsor Little League baseball teams, right? I mean, it's such a different atmosphere. So it's not necessarily the area around these places. It's very, very different than the overall sense of the industry. And of course, Costco, a very powerful carrier, but the fourth biggest, the other, the 3 and 5, I don't know how you measure it exactly, but 3 and 5, the first 3 and 5 are all European. Last we checked, all of these countries are our allies. I don't know about Switzerland. That's always confusing. But the point is that we, so that perception is sort of what needs to be addressed. On the other hand, though, I will tell you, as I said 2 years ago, I think the carriers had a lot to answer to. Some of the broader complaints about them may not have been true. They weren't, taking ships off the water in order to bump up prices even more during the COVID pandemic. But, they had a long way to go in terms of their service. The detention and demurrage system, fairly or not, it frankly just lost credibility with shippers. Shippers weren't picking up their boxes because they said, well, I'm going to get this huge, millions of dollars in per diem fees anyway. It doesn't matter what I do. And a lot of what we've tried to do is restore credibility to the detention and demurrage fees in order, because we don't want to get rid of that system. We need that system to encourage cargo flow, but we need it to be fair and credible.
If I can ask, the commission found, Rebecca Dye found that there was no collusion, that they're the super competitive market. And then you go and you get this flurry of bills somewhere in the beginning of this year. One of them calling to basically end antitrust exemptions for carriers. How do you sort of view that in terms of it's almost like they are disagreeing with what the commission is finding, or.
Well, so a couple of things. One is Rebecca Dye indeed found that, but actually I appreciate your correction because although it is her finding, the Federal Maritime Commission, the 5 of us as a whole, we never had a vote on that, right? So it was her finding as the fact-finding officer, and in that sense, you can say it's an FMC conclusion, but it's not, it's not an official FMC conclusion. I thought her report was fantastic, and I agreed with all of her recommendations, but I don't feel like I know enough to be able to make that conclusion that there was no collusion, right? All I can sort of say is that there was nothing actionable on the part of the FMC up until then. Nothing worth bringing to court or anything like that. But so to answer your real question, though, why are these proposals? Look, I think to a certain extent they're symbolic. They are because it's a foreign. I mean, some of the people sponsoring them are the very people who nearby ports would be harmed. But when I talk to them privately, they say, well, they know, it's not, they know it's more complicated, right, than that. But they they want to spur action. They want to keep pressure on, and also like you take somebody like John Garamendi, who supported some of those proposals, but he is also very willing to support a proposal that 2 of the commissioners have proffered that does not get rid of the alliances or the antitrust exemption, but enhances our as FMC's power to monitor it and make sure that they don't go on forever without some sort of renewal and that sort of thing. And I'm very much for that, and I think that would be fully compatible with the current alliance structure. I mean, you can change. This I think is also relevant to the European Union's reevaluation and other things. Is that a change? It's not a black and white. A change doesn't mean, oh my God, the alliances have to disappear tomorrow if we change this at all. Obviously, a repeal that would, but a repeal is not. If you speak certainly off the record, but maybe even on the record, there's no appetite for Congress to do that. It simply wouldn't go through. And I think though there's skepticism. Incidentally, there are violations. There could be collusion that wouldn't be. We monitor what's in the agreements. If none of the agreements allow the carriers to collude on price, right? They're allowed to space share. They're allowed to talk about a variety of things. I mean, it's all written down there. If they were to collude on price, it wouldn't be the Federal Maritime Commission that would enforce it. It's possible they would. It's very possible they would violate the Shipping Act as well. But the actual price that violation of antitrust law would be a violation of traditional antitrust laws that, because it's not in the agreement, they don't have immunity to, and the Justice Department would do it. And the Justice Department, as you may know, continues to investigate a couple of things. So it's ongoing.
Do you think that the Commissioner Dye's findings and the extended powers that you have through OSRA have moved the dial at all with the shipper and BCO community? Because there has traditionally been an us and them approach to doing business with the ocean carriers. I'm just wondering, do you see that relationship improving at all, or getting more?
I think to the extent it's improving, it probably has far more to do with market conditions than with anything we've done, in that the market has basically flipped on its head, and now there's far more space than there are shipments to take up the space, and that has lowered prices dramatically over COVID, and they dropped far faster than I predicted anyway. So I think where we've really done some good, and it's not so much from Rebecca's report, but from Rebecca's work on the incentive principle and the unanimously supported interpretive rule talking about detention and demurrage. I think where we really have done a good job of restoring credibility to that system, and to the extent we haven't, we've at least restored credibility to the FMC as a regulator with teeth. We are investigating in some cases for the first time in a long time the major carriers, sometimes major MTOs. We feel like we have the resources and wherewithal to go after them if necessary. Now, that doesn't mean we're not willing to settle a case, and in fact, most of these cases get settled, and that's fine. This is not criminal, criminal law. It's civil law. We just want to set up a credible deterrent, and so that the carriers, frankly, don't have an incentive to get away with something because their competition is getting away with it. And there, I won't say we don't still have a long way to go, and we have to finish the rules we are doing, et cetera, the regulations we are doing in answer to OSRA, but I think we've come a long way. And that has had maybe not a direct impact, but certainly an indirect impact on ocean shippers.
Are you concerned that there may be sort of vexatious cases being brought at the moment? Vexatious cases being brought, whereas people have seen others getting away with it. They've got a bugbear from something that happened during the pandemic periods of supply chain crisis, and they're seeing a lot of cases coming to the FMC now, and that people are going to try it on effectively because they've seen others be successful. And also, there does seem to be a higher volume of cases going through. Do you have the resources to actually be able to handle and address all of these as they come through?
Yeah, that's a good question. First of all, to agree with the premise of your question, it's incredible how much the volume has shifted. In some measures of cases, we've got roughly twice as many cases. But in terms of activity, when you bring in our consumer affairs division, other kinds of case, there's private cases filed, and then there's complaints we're looking at. It's like roughly about 3 times the activity. We used to have 1 administrative law judge. Now we have 3, and in order to just get on top of things. So do we have the enough resources? The answer is no, not yet. We're working on it, but it's not that I'm going to Congress right now and saying, "Oh, that was great. Thank you for giving us the increase you gave us. We want more now," because it's a part of it is just needing to hire people fast. We need people with very good skills. They don't necessarily have to have the absolute specifics, but they need to be good attorneys or good economists, and then be willing to work for the federal government. So, finding these combinations of people takes time. Making sure that our organization is such that it's effective takes time. So, but already we've at least established a far greater level of active activity that I think has reinforced that sense that some people have had success. Maybe we will too. And even if we don't, it's worth a try. And our number of cases. Obviously, as detention and demurrage fees have gone down, so have some of the cases, but we're still, of course, there is a lag, so we're adjudicating courses that came before. The other thing that's a big deal is the bill itself. OSRA had a special fast-track process for billing complaints, mostly involving detention and demurrage. So you wouldn't use it for a complaint about a competition thing or something major like retaliation or something like that. But for these sort of more strict billing rules, like they charged us for a box we couldn't pick up. There's a fast track proposal for that. So that's that, and it's still an interim process because we needed to set it up quickly. But it's working fairly well. There are kinks that we're trying to get out of it, but it's that has also helped to have that new process that Congress gave us, right? That nobody can say to us, stop doing that. You're over interpreting, specifically in the law.
That's a charge complaint.
Yes, charge complaint process. Yes.
Can I just one quick follow up on that? We've had a number of cases on the sort of failure to do business coming through. Effectively, carriers being accused of not taking contracted bookings. These are being resolved, and there have been settlements. Do you think that, and we're in a period now where there's far more capacity than there are containers to utilise that capacity. However, should we go back to a period of tight capacity, do you think the carriers will have learnt lessons and have a stronger adherence to their contracts next time around?
So, to me, there's sort of two issues intertwined naturally, intertwined here. One of them is sort of this, refusal to negotiate, and the new law has a clause that you cannot unreasonably refuse the space, not just not refuse to negotiate, but refuse the space. One of the things I've done that is, I guess, minorly controversial is I've taken that refuse the space clause and put it into the same rule framework. It's not formalized yet, so we're going through the process. But because I couldn't see how we as a commission could fully enforce the refuse to deal without also being able to have the same set of rules more or less enforce the refuse space. So I don't know the answer to your question whether but it will. Some of the stuff they did during COVID, or at least allegedly did during COVID, would be illegal now, and it wasn't illegal before. But the other part of your question, when you start to talk about contracts, that is a real issue, and the complaints are on both sides. That during COVID, it was like the carriers are not obeying their contracts. They're not taking in our boxes, or they're taking 40 of our boxes instead of 100, and they're instead playing favorites with who's paying more, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the other side, you do have a fair down with the term of art is fall down rate, where people are overbooking on ships. Frankly, trying to, particularly like agricultural exporters in the U.S., they may book on a couple of ships because they can't afford not to get on. So they overbook, and then it leads to the carrier saying, "Well, look, don't blame us for putting 100, filling our ship with 120%." Planning, because there's this fall down rate, and that is something that's not. Although there's a clause that does give us a little bit more oversight over contracts and their terms in OSRA, I think it's fair to say that we still need to look at that issue. I'm not sure if it's a governmental solution, but we might be able to help. I mean, this is one. It's a game theory problem, right? The industry. It's a self. Both sides are losing in the end. So there should be some sort of way to solve it, and it is so market-based. One of the potential private sector ways to solve it are things like NICHEX and other kinds of freight exchanges, where both sides kind of put up some money in a pot, right? And you say, okay, well, if we don't show up with the cargo, you get the carrier gets the money. If the carrier doesn't give us space, we get the money. And because of the market conditions now, we're seeing that the shipper, the exporter, for instance, won't show up with the cargo, and then the carrier is entitled to that money, and they say, no, we'd rather get along well with this customer. That's okay. I mean, so there's a real issue here, just how powerful the market is over anything that, any kind of a contract itself. I don't think it's nefarious. I don't really think it's nefarious. I think it's just the nature of a contract is, in some ways worth the paper it's written on. Now, keep in mind, I'm not an attorney, but that's it. It's just a piece of paper, and if there's too much space, we'll take it. And if there's not enough space, I'm sorry, I don't care how many pieces of paper you have.
But in the past, the FMC has proposed or tried to get both sides to include an arbitration clause or something like that within the contracts. And it never really worked. Neither the carriers nor the shippers would do it. Why do you think that is? I mean, would that have been a solution?
Look, it's something we're certainly thinking about, figuring out more ways of arbitrating. I know, different commissioners are doing different kinds of work. And, gosh, Janet, I'm not smart enough to answer that question. I know it's going to be difficult to find a solution. I do think the FMC has a role to play, though, because it is an area where, again, the industry is hurting itself, and it becomes a vicious cycle, and the decline in efficiency hurts us all. So therefore, it is certainly of our concern, because what you want is a system where there's competition, but there's also reliability, that when you buy space, you're going to get that space, and when you don't. And frankly, look, this gets into another thing that I've become a bit of a broken record on, which is, shippers in the United States, even from the fairly large companies, tend not to be experts, certainly not in maritime, but not necessarily even in transportation, but they know their business. They've been in their companies 10, 20, 25 years. If they're the executive in charge, they know their business, but they don't necessarily know shipping. And when they got into shipping, they said, okay, my job is to get things from A to B, right? Or maybe from a bunch of A's to a bunch of B's, but whatever it is, it's so just draw a line, right? A two-dimensional approach. And now it's increasingly clear, it's increasingly clear that their job is risk mitigation. It's figuring out, how do I diversify the supply chain, so if something happens here or there or wherever, if there's a pandemic or a weather event or a war or somebody getting stuck in a canal or low water levels in another canal, that you can still get stuff to market and still sell stuff to your customers, particularly when the demand might be there, right? So that has changed. That's changing everything. And what we're trying to do is take the things that we do have some control over, like per diem costs, and make sure that those are fair in a fairly stable and predictable system, or things like rates, and make sure those are as transparent as possible, because of all the stuff that nobody can predict.
You mentioned earlier, you referred to 2M, which is going to split up at the end of this year.
Beginning of
25, sorry.
There are still hopes of reconciliation.
Would you want them to reconcile?
I would have no opinion on that.
You seem concerned that it might sort of trigger another round of mergers and consolidation, or maybe even worse. I mean, why are you getting that sense, or is it just a sort of gut feeling?
I actually am getting the opposite sense. I was so concerned about it at first that I've asked a lot of questions, and it seems that the remaining alliances are actually, in some ways, the breakup has made them both healthier. I've heard that more about one than another, but in no case is there any sort of conclusion? Oh, we're going to, this means this is the end of our alliance or whatever. There has been talk of obviously mergers and acquisitions and HMM, which you've reported on, and other kinds of things. I don't know if I think that's more spurred on by simply the large amounts of capital that the lines have because of the COVID windfall. And I actually think, to their credit, they're trying to figure out, okay, well, how do we make our businesses stronger for the future? But yeah, there's always going to be concern about that. I've had private conversations with both chief executive officers of both MSC and Maersk, and I won't tell you much about those conversations, but I can tell you that both of them assured me that they are not looking to get remarried. So in that sense, it wouldn't be one of those things. They're big. They're both big. They're both. It's important that they have real competition, right? So it is important, I think, that the remaining alliances either continue to exist or exist in some form or whatever. I'm agnostic to all of that, but so that there be proper competition and proper service to America's ports, particularly our smaller and more medium-sized ports. But I'm not panicked. I'm concerned.
In the past, the FMC has held summits with Brussels and China. Do you still have a relationship with your opposite numbers in Beijing?
We certainly do, but we have not had a meeting in enough time that it's time to sort of have another meeting. And I have no doubt that our counterparts, if you will, with their maritime agency, that it doesn't, right? They're fine. I think they would like to meet, but broader politics, everybody's got to make sure that it's okay and proper, and it just so happens that they were the ones whose turn it was to host the next one, though the European Union's turn to host ended up being virtual. So I don't know if that's created some confusion, but we do have bilateral, unofficial, contacts with them. It's not like we're totally out of touch, but I do think a trilateral between all three of us, which is we try to do every 2 years, is very important, and particularly important because the last one was virtual. And then, of course, I have a fair amount, a great deal of contact, as do the other commissioners, particularly Commissioner Dye, who's our ranking Republican, with the DG Comp in Brussels. So we don't have to have the same systems, but we have to have systems that are compatible enough that you don't have to change ships in the Mid-Atlantic or Mid-Pacific because the regulations on one side of the ocean are different than the regulations on the other.
Do you get any sense of the how the EU Consortia rule review is going? Have they discussed that with you?
I can answer your second question, but not your first. Your second question is yes. The answer to your second question is yes. But I can't give you a sense. I thought this was a no spoiler podcast.
So it wouldn't. I mean, whatever the outcome of that, I mean, you just have to accept.
I'm confident we can work together as we always have. So whatever the outcome of that, absolutely. But it's their business, right? It's not us, and they have a very different system. And frankly, the block exemption is very different than our partial antitrust, waiver. So it's just not, it's important for us to have the contact, but certainly not something that I feel like I would have any role in weighing in. I mean, that just wouldn't be appropriate. But nor would I be helpful. So they have their own process, but.
And that, I'm afraid, is where we shall leave it. As you can probably tell, that was a conversation that went on for quite some time. But we have a few other audio treats coming your way over the next few days, so I don't want to spoil your appetite. My thanks to Dan for gamely submitting to the group interrogation, and of course, thank you for listening. Goodbye.